Welcome back to my channel. It is Candace with the K here, where I normally talk books, beauty, and kicks. Today I am giving my review of Memphis by Tara Stringfellow, and I think that this might be my favorite book of 2022. I purchased my copy of Memphis from a local bookstore here in Los Angeles, Malik Books, which you can find them in the Crenshaw Mall and the Fox Hills Mall, or Westfield, Culver City, whatever. It's always gonna be the Fox Hills Mall. I've been sitting on this book for a really long time because, as any avid reader knows, your TBR or to be read list is very, very, very long. I finally decided to pick it up because, one, I think the cover is gorgeous. That blue and the hues that pop off the page kept staring at me, and I was like, you know what, I'm finally gonna pick up this book. And I'm really glad that I did. So anyone who follows this channel, follows any of my accounts, they know that Homegoing was one of my favorite books because I really like the flow through generation, through time. And Memphis does something very similar. However, it is all within the women in a single family, back and forth. So in this review, what I am going to do is I'm going to give my breakdown of each woman and their character arc throughout the entire book, and then give you my final thoughts. So very briefly, this book is about a family of dynamic women that go through their own trials and tribulations that kind of maintain their own family legacy. And so that's very brief, very I want you to read the book. If you read it, please keep watching. And one thing that this book does is it only flows through the women. So I love that. The men, they're there, their perspective is necessary, but it is not pivotal to the outcome of the book because the book is focused on the women. So we're going to start with Hazel. So Hazel is the matriarch of the family. And so Hazel has two children who are Miriam and August. Then Miriam has two daughters, which are Joan and Maya. And August has her son, Derek. All of these characters are pivotal to the story, and I just love the way it was unveiled, and I love it. Hazel was living in Memphis, and she meets the love of her life. And the way in which they meet is in a segregated deli, where in Memphis, she was accustomed to kind of moving how she wanted to despite segregation. And the particular deli owner kind of allows her, because he's in this Black neighborhood. You got to kind of adapt to your environment, so to speak. So she notices a man. She's so consumed by this man. And in comes a white officer. And he tries to flex his muscle, flex his power, telling her like, girl, you better, right? The one that she's infatuated with tells her, I got you. And he's able to get her out of this, what could potentially be a hostile situation. And from there, his name is Myron, they fall madly in love. Myron builds this house. Myron takes care of her as a man should. But growing up in this segregated environment, she is faced with having to lose her husband at an early age due to him being lynched. So she goes down to the police station where he works and kind of gets sexually harassed by the white officers who are kind of trying to flex their racial power over her. And Myron tells her, I don't ever want you to come to this station again. And that same night, his body is found in the river. And when the officer comes, she spits in his face. And I was like, yes. I really love the way the author painted the imagery of having to deal with that grief, and how she didn't wallow in it. And especially what I loved is how the community came together around her following the death of her husband, how they looked out for her, how they cared for her, and how her home became a staple within her community. And then the way also within Hazel's narrative, how they spoke of the passing of Dr. Martin Luther King, who of course died in Memphis. I thought that was beautiful. Her story really jumpstarts the North women's legacy within Memphis. And so when Hazel has her first daughter, because she loses her husband while she's pregnant with her first daughter, Miriam, she is having to raise this woman independently. But as a woman with her own needs, she ends up meeting August's father and having a baby with August, whom she also loses to being a civil rights activist and essentially to the racial segregation climate of the time. So then let's move on to Miriam first. I think Miriam's story is very powerful in that she's also meets her husband very young. He pulls her away from Memphis to North Carolina. She's doing everything she can as a wife. He's a Marine. She's trying to hold him down, but in the end, he is abusive. And she knows that this can't sustain, and she's going to have to take her and her children away from this environment to protect her girls. Early in the book, he is being sworn into lieutenant, and she decides to get super glam, puts on these red shoes, and he's just disgusted by her. And it takes his best friend to tell her that red shoes are a trigger for him because that's what he saw on the little girl that they had to bomb in the war. And she says, well, good, because that nigga gonna remember the day I walked out his life. And I said, okay, Miriam, I love you. Because in so many situations in real life, we see women who stay in these abusive relationships for the kids. And she was like, I'm not doing it. Not doing it. Not doing it at all. That was crazy. So part of their story, or the disillusionment of their marriage, really starts after they take a trip back to Memphis, and August, the sister's son, Derek, sexually abuses Miriam's youngest daughter, Joan. So Joan is 3, and he sexually abused her with a hanger. And I can't recall the age difference between Joan and Derek, but he's of course older. And I would assume he would know right from wrong. Not saying that he did or didn't. I don't recall. But that happens, and the dad, whose name is Jax, is constantly weighing that over Miriam, like, you let this happen to our daughter. So that was where the disillusionment of their marriage begins, and then it just goes all down here from there, where he then becomes abusive, and she's like, I got to go. And the only place she can go is back to Memphis, where her father had built this house for her mother. So the home is really the staple piece within the family. And so when they move back to Memphis, Joan is reignited by these feelings of her abuser and being in the presence of her abuser. And so when I get to Joan, I'll talk about all of that. So Miriam is having to navigate that. And what I love is that she was able to rebuild her life post leaving her man. So we're talking about going back to school, working countless hours just to put herself in a better situation, because for all those years she was dependent on a man. I loved that storyline, loved it. So if we go on to August has kind of been the free-spirited, more direct, more aggressive sister. She's a hairstylist, although her true passion was singing. And so there's this constant creative, artistic thread going through the women. August, although she has never been married, ended up having a son at a very young age. And following the sexual abuse to her niece, she could just tell that her son was off and just let him be, essentially. He ended up running in with the wrong people and got sentenced to life in prison, which I'll revisit again. So then we go back to Miriam's children, who are Joan and Maya. We don't get Maya's perspective in this book, which I kind of wish we did. That would have been something that I would have really enjoyed. But we get more of Maya's perspective through Joan. And so Joan, she has to reface her sexual abuser, which triggers a lot of anger and all kinds of different emotions in her. But she's also having to navigate being in a separated home, adjusting to realizing that her passion is, although she excels in school, her passion is art, and having to confront that with her mother, and kind of just all the intricacies of growing up in a time with 9/11 happened, and the way that it was talked about in the book is very beautiful. Just the language and the use of it. All in all, Joan's story is also unique in that each woman in this story turned to Miss Dawn, or like the voodoo witch down the street, for some type of guidance, reassurance, assessment of a situation or something. And Joan did the same thing, in which Miss Dawn told her, you want that boy gone? Go bury his comb in the backyard and he'll be out of your life. And 2 years later, he went to jail for life. And I think Miss Dawn's character was so unique that it interconnected all the women, because she had been through each generation, and it was a revisiting of just the community that exists in Black communities that we are starting to lose. We're losing recipes, y'all. And community is highlighted in a lot of aspects in this book, and I love that. So first we see it in their neighborhood, the constant revisiting of the deli. Make sure you go send this pie to Stanley. We also see it in the beauty shop. This is another place of community where women are able to come together, kiki, laugh, listen to music, dance, what have you. We see instances of community when the Dr. King passed, when her husband was lynched. People came to the house to check up on her and make sure she was straight. And I just love that reoccurring subtle theme throughout the entire book. I've never personally been to Memphis, and I really do want to go to Memphis, but this really made me feel like this is a good place for Negroes. All in all, it is one of my favorite books. I don't want to make this review super long because I probably could talk on and on about this book. I think there were just so many nuances that were addressed that I absolutely loved. Again, community. Again, the use of how each generation had an issue with girl. Like, don't girl me, don't, you know. I thought that was beautiful. The imagery around quilts and the comfort that a blanket, like a safety net, can provide. I just think there are so many little nuggets in this book that make this such a dynamic story that I am probably going to rave about it for the rest of the year, if not forever. I would probably reread this book eventually down the line because that's how much I enjoyed it. Great storytelling, great imagery, great use of language and words. I really, really enjoyed it. But there's also a recurring theme of forgiveness, which is very subtle, and not even forgiveness in the intent that you have to welcome this person back, but a forgiveness and letting go. So we see that with Miriam and Jax, where he comes back after she thought this guy died, and she kind of is forgiving him. We see that with Joan and Derek, her visit to the jail, kind of just letting that rock. Now, I am curious how Maya's perspective would change the book, whether for better or worse, but how her perspective would change coming from someone even younger and someone who just had a different lens on life. I would also really like to know the whole tea behind Bird and August, because I know she had eyes for him at the wedding. She ends up doing a do with him in the salon, but like, was that Derek's father? Is where I was thinking. And I don't know. Maybe I missed that or read that too quickly, but I would like to know that tea. I'm not going to make this any longer because I do want you to read it, and I really like this book, and I'm willing to keep the conversation going in the comments down below. So if you're interested, let's start it up. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button, and I will see you in my next video.